Believe it or not, it's been nearly 10 years, 10 whole years since Donald Trump first came down that escalator and promised to make America great again. For 10 years, Make America Great Again has been his slogan in office and out of office. And for 10 years, it's never been quite so clear what exactly that means. When was America great, and what would it mean to make it great again? Trump has never really specified when exactly America was great. He's left some hints and clues here and there. Was America great during his childhood in the 1950s and 60s? Was it during his young adulthood in the 70s and 1980s? Was America great when he was a bona fide celebrity, someone recognizable across the globe in the 1990s and 2000s? He doesn't say. Of course, there's no reason really to wait for some kind of direct answer from Trump. The point of the slogan isn't to literally point to a period in the past where America was great. The point is to evoke a kind of nostalgia that many different kinds of people across the social spectrum can feel, and they can fill in their own blanks. They can imagine for themselves when it was that America was great, and thus what it would mean to make it great again. For every Trump voter and for every red hat out there, there's just a different idea of what it means to make America great, and thus what it means to make us great again. And yet it is clear that Trump does have some sense of what it means to make America great, and thus some sense of when America was great. And you can really see it in his second term agenda. To make America great is to make this country a kind of autarky, a self-sufficient nation, unconcerned and uninterested with what happens beyond our borders, capable of producing everything for ourselves without any other kind of intervention. Genuine autarky is rare and doesn't even really work where it kind of exists. But if you're looking for something like an example of an autarkic society, you could try North Korea. The state ideology of North Korea is, in fact, an expression of this desire for total self-sufficiency. I suppose then it's a little bit significant that Trump seems to have a man crush on Kim Jong-un, but that's a different video and a different discussion. In pursuit of this extreme self-sufficiency, Trump, of course, wants to impose huge tariffs on every single nation that trades with the United States, including our closest trading partners, Canada and Mexico. This is all part of a broader scheme to revive a kind of quasi-mercantilist economy, where the most important thing is that we have a positive balance of trade, and nothing else really quite matters. Trump also, in pursuing this sort of closed society, wants to deport as many immigrants as he can get his hands on and close the borders to most newcomers. He has a narrow vision of the American nation, a cramped idea of who counts as part of the national community, and also has an opposition to birthright citizenship, the promise guaranteed in the 14th Amendment that if you're born on American soil, you are an American citizen. Again, all of this is part of a narrow, closed conception of what the country is and what the nation is and what it ought to be. This is what it means to be great, I suppose. To the extent that Trump is looking outward at all, it's for territorial acquisition. He seems obsessed with the idea of making Canada the 51st state of the United States, regardless of what the Canadians think. He seems obsessed with trying to make Greenland part of the United States. Why? I'm not entirely sure, although my guess is that it has something to do with the fact that Greenland looks very large on certain maps. He has threatened to seize the Panama Canal Zone and has floated invading Mexico in order to stop the cartels. Imposing tariffs, expanding territory, a new Mexican war, and a narrow vision of the American people. If this is what it means to make America great again, then the point where America was great can't have possibly been in the 20th century when the United States abandoned most of this kind of politics. In fact, if you have to look somewhere for this exact package of policy ideas, when all of these things were mainstream, when there was a Mexican war, when, for example, there were tariffs constantly being placed on foreign nations, when Americans tried as hard as they could to create a narrow conception of the nation's identity. If you want to look for that time, you got to look back to the 19th century. You have to look back before the U.S. essentially built the modern international order. You have to look back to a time when the U.S. was a small, second-rate power with little influence over anything but other than what goes on within its own borders. Each part of Trump's second-term vision really does seem drawn from a different part of the 1800s. His tariffs come from a time before the ratification of the 16th Amendment and the emergence of a national income tax, when tariffs were one of the primary ways of raising revenue for the United States government. Not coincidentally, during this time, the federal state was much smaller and Gilded Age oligarchs had a much easier time buying influence and wielding power. The decades of the 1800s, and especially the late 1800s, also saw successful efforts to exclude large numbers of so-called undesirable workers from the country. The Chinese Exclusion Act, for example, was passed in 1882, and if you just look at some of the arguments made in favor of Chinese exclusion, you'd be hard-pressed to distinguish them from the anti-immigrant arguments made today in the 21st century. The 19th century saw the rise of manifest destiny and a rapacious territorial expansion. We even had a Mexican War prosecuted by President James K. Polk in 1846. And Trump clearly pines for the days before birthright citizenship, which, as I mentioned, was ratified into the Constitution with the 14th Amendment in 1868. It is not for nothing that Trump seems obsessed with President William McKinley, who was elected president in 1896, unfortunately passed away due to an assassin's bullet in 1901, but nonetheless represents the kind of apex of oligarchical rule in the United States. Trump is constantly referencing McKinley and constantly referencing McKinley's tariffs.
If you go back and look at the 1890s, 1880s, McKinley, and you take a look at tariffs, that was when we were at our proportionately the richest.
To be fair to the soon-to-be president, his McKinley obsession makes a certain kind of sense. Like his ill-fated precursor, Trump is the favored candidate of oligarchs. And he may even owe his second term to the largesse of a 21st century equivalent of a robber baron. And McKinley and Trump share a certain kind of political vision, one of untrammeled power and authority for the owners of wealth and capital, an America by business, for business, and of business, whose chief export to the world is imperialistic greed. As a billionaire himself, in fact, Trump has every reason to look to the 19th century as a kind of golden age for people exactly like him, a point in our country's history where the path to power was as easy and straightforward as it could possibly be for people of great wealth and means. You think things are bad now. They were much worse back then, in large part because the federal state simply wasn't large enough or powerful enough to really regulate or control large fortunes and owners of wealth. Public power was weak, private power was very strong, and the result was that the rich ran roughshod over the rest of us. This is a time when labor was at its weakest and when the owners of capital, business owners, factory owners, could call in federal troops or state troops or police to inflict violence on discontented workers wherever they might be. If what Trump idolizes and lionizes is some part of the 19th century, then to make America great again is to make the U.S. a poorer and less significant nation whose government is mainly just an engine of upward redistribution for the wealthiest among us. To be fair to the incoming president, I doubt he has any of these ideas in his head, any of these precedents floating around up there. I would be shocked if Trump could name more than one or two facts about William McKinley and more than 4 or 5 about the entire 19th century. So I don't think this is deliberate planning on his part. What Trump does have, though, is a fundamental sense that we live in a zero-sum world, where in order for someone to win, someone must lose, and in order for someone to get ahead, someone must fall behind. And in order for America to be on the top, the rest of the world must be on the bottom. His social Darwinistic intuitions are very clearly an artifact of an earlier age of reactionary aggression. I think this is an ugly and repugnant vision, but it is a vision nonetheless. It speaks to the great ambitions of some Americans and the frustrations and ennui of others. If nothing else, this is a vision that gives the appearance of action rather than stagnation. And for many millions of Americans, that's enough. That's enough to sign on. Opposing it will require an even more robust vision, a vision of a positive sum world where everyone can gain if we work together. But right now, there aren't many people in the American field, especially in our politics, who are capable of articulating those kind of ideas. But we'll have to see what happens.